Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Beyond Access series. We're so excited to be here today. Today, we are continuing our three-part series on special education foundations with Include NYC, and we're happy to welcome back Kim McCoy, Senior Family Educator. And tonight's topic is understanding your child's IEP. Kim is going to walk us through and explore the Individualized Education Program, including its purpose, how it's developed, and how parents and students participate. So we're very excited to have Kim back. But before we hand it over to Kim, I'm going to hand it over to Ori to give us some housekeeping announcements.
Thank you, Jose, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again, as always. Just a reminder for everyone, as always, the chat function is disabled, but obviously, if you do have questions throughout the webinar, please don't hesitate to ask during the Q&A function. That will be able to ask throughout the entire presentation. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can as the webinar is proceeding, but we do allot time at the end of the webinar to make sure that we go and answer as many questions as we can. And also, please don't worry if you do miss anything from today's session. We do post these recordings the day after on our YouTube channel, Beyond Access. And obviously, you've heard it before, but if you're not following us, give us a follow. We got a lot of great content, obviously, on the stuff we're talking about tonight, and obviously future to come. And guys, there's only 2 more sessions for the rest of the year for Beyond Access after this one. So make sure that you are looking out for the emails on the final 2 sessions, continuing on the IEP, and then summer movement. So just make sure to be looking out for announcements on that. But tonight, as Jose said, very excited to be doing another one with Include NYC on understanding your child's IEP with Kim. And without further ado, I'm going to let her take it over from here.
Thank you so much for that, Ori. Oh, wait, it says that I can't share.
You should be able to share now.
Kim, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So once again, I am Kim McCoy, and I am a senior family educator at Include NYC, where I provide guidance and information to parents, guardians, and professionals who are themselves supporting early childhood and school-age children with disabilities. So for the purposes of this, school age is kindergarten through high school. In more recent years, you know, I've been doing a lot of work with OPWDD and some other transitioning stuff with as children go from high school into the working world. And I have personal experience working in special education. I used to teach, and my youngest son also has a disability. So I am sure I'm very well acquainted with this, and I look forward to doing this with you. So hold on, let's go to the. All right, so Include NYC is, like I said, we help children birth through 26, navigate the disability landscape. So this could be through our direct assistance line. This could be through, we also do trainings, we do outreach, we do a whole bunch of things like that. We have a lot of community partners, as you can see, and we have tons of workshops. If you ever have a question after this and you need assistance or help, please do reach out to us on the helpline. The number is 212-677-4660. And now I'm going to start the training. So these are the goals of this training. We want you to walk away from this understanding the IEP. We want you to note some key sections of the IEP, which is the Individualized Education Program. I'm going to say IEP for the rest of the night, but it is the Individualized Education Program, right? And then we hope that you can walk away from this identifying 1 or 2 steps that you can take to increase your participation in the IEP process. So like Jose mentioned last week, when I hosted the Beyond Access series, then I did Intro to Special Education. And today I'm going to be going through some of the same sections quickly as a review, but the main focus is going to be on the IEP itself. So what's an IEP? So keep in mind, it's a legally binding contract for 1 year's worth of services, right? And every time you see an IEP, it's going to have it has a date where your services could start. And then 1 year from then is when they're supposed to end, more or less, right? Every IEP should be completely new and showing your children services. So it shouldn't be the exact same thing you saw the year before. It should be different because your child, they change and they grow, they learn, sometimes they regress, and that IEP needs to show that. The IEP also describes and defines eligibility criteria by disability. We'll talk more about that as we go on. There is also a PLOP, which we call the present levels of performance, and most of these portions of the IEP are very important, but the PLOP, you find out a lot about a child, what their challenges are, what their strengths are. So you definitely want to look at the PLOPs. Parental concerns, that's where parents get to, speak their truth and tell you about the child, what their concerns are about the child in social, emotional, academic, and physical. You also have goals, right? And so they'll talk about they should be SMART goals, and we'll speak more of that later. And then it recommends services. So accommodations to meet the yearly goals also, right? But before we move on, I just want you to keep in mind, and I will always say, special education equals services. And so we're going to go through that some more later. So what are the steps? The first step is a referral by someone who suspects the child should be evaluated. So that can be a parent who suspects that their child needs some help. It could be a teacher or other school personnel, or it could be a doctor, your child's pediatrician, maybe if they receive some other kind of, therapy. Those are the people who would make those recommendations. They would refer it. That step is called the referral. The next step is the evaluation. The first evaluation is a psychoeducational evaluation, and that's always done when a referral is made in the DOE. This gives foundational information, and it lets you know is basic tests that they take, all kids take it, and it just sort of it serves as a baseline to let you know where your child is, what kind of things they need, where they have strengths and where they have weaknesses. Often it's done by a psychologist working at the school, or if you're like in a charter school or a private school, it'll be by a psychologist from the CSC, and that's the Committee on Special Education. If your child is between 3 and 5, then it would be the Committee on Preschool Special Education. And typically it tests your IQ, your child's IQ, and their academic performance. A social history is provided by the parent in a conversation with the DOE staff. So this is your opportunity to make sure that they learn about your child, right? So we always recommend that you prepare some bullet points before a meeting or a phone call. They're going to talk about the child's developmental history. They want to know about the early milestones. What things did your child receive early intervention? Did you know that they hit their milestones on time, so far as you know? They're going to talk about family history, relationships with peers and siblings. Is there a history of whatever you're noticing and seeing? Is there a history of this in your family? Is there a cousin, an uncle, a grandparent who, also you've seen these kind of this kind of behavior or these kind of challenges, right? And then the response to limits and discipline, right? Because the way that a child is with you is very different than the way that a child is with teachers. So what is your response when you tell your child no? If you take something away from them, do they just, act like they don't care, or just, maybe sort of toss it aside, or do they have a full-on tantrum and it takes them, maybe an hour to recover from it, or anywhere in between? But these are the things that they're going to ask you about. They're also going to want to know about your medical history, your child's medical history, and that you get from their physician. So every year, children they get their annual medical evaluation. I forget what it's called, annual physical. So that's what we're talking about. They fill out the form. You can get that. It doesn't have, they just want the most up-to-date one. So you don't have to go to the doctor and get something from, the last month. You can just show them the most up-to-date one. And then there's an observation, and that's usually by a psychologist or a special education teacher. And they try to do it in the child's classroom setting, right? Because this is the DOE. So they want to see how your child is in the classroom. How do they learn? How do they, participate with their peers? How do they respond and listen to their teachers? to how do they express themselves? How do they receive information? These are all the things they're looking for, right? And you can request specific evaluations if you think they're needed. So some of these other types of evaluations could be a speech evaluation, an occupational therapy evaluation, an assistive technology evaluation. That would be with computers, tablets, maybe an FM system. Occupational therapy deals with fine motor skills, right? So handwriting, buckling and unbuckling, hands, zippers, holding spoons, forks, those kind of things. A psychiatric evaluation, that would be called in if your child is harming themselves or harming others. Can also request a functional behavior assessment, and that would be for behavioral concerns. And then that functional behavior assessment, known as the FBA, that drives the behavior intervention plan, which is a BIP, right? And school lingo, you're always going to say, do they have a BIP? Do they have a BIP? They're asking if your child has a behavior intervention plan. And the functional behavioral assessment, the FBA, is what they use to decide what kind of interventions should go into the plan. And then you schedule your IEP meeting, right? And so it's important to try to have a good relationship with the IEP team, right? So, just this process should take about 60 days, right? Like typically it's about 60 days, but we're gonna go on some more. So those are your IEP steps. So now who's in charge? Well, if your child is between 3 and 5, that's CPSE. And that's what we call the Committee for Preschool Special Education, right? So it's a little bit different because some schools have an internal process that deals with CPSE or deals with this kind of thing, but generally it normally goes through the Committee on Preschool Special Education. If your child is between the ages of 5 and 21, then the referral is to the school-based IEP team, and that's whether it's a community school or a District 75 school, right? If it's a charter school, then it's the people in charge of that process, the special education process, is the CSE, and that's the Committee on Special Education. So the CSE and the CPSE are basically the same. It's just that CPSE deals with 3 to 5, CSE deals with 5 through 21. So, and they are in the same place. There's 10 of them, right? Districts, there's CPSE 1 through 10 or CSE 1 through 10. And it's basically based on the district where the school is located, right? So there are each CPSE or CSE, they deal with about 3 to 5 different school districts. That's how you like to think about it, right? And then if a child goes to a general education private school, then it's also the CSC district where the school is located, not where the child lives. So both of my children go to private schools, and the CSE is not at all the one that's for my neighborhood, right? So it's not for where we live, it's for where their school is located. And if your child is in a private school, they get an IESP, which is an Individualized Education Service Plan, which is very similar to an IEP, but the IESP is for students who go to private schools, and IEP is for children in the DOE. And now if they go to a non-public school approved special education school, that's also where the CSE of the school is located, not where the family's home is. And if it's a non-approved special education school, once again, it's at a CSE district where the school is located, not at the family's home, okay? So now that we did that, let's go on to the next slide. So who's gonna make this decision about your child and whether or not they're eligible, right? Well, the IEP team does it, right? So who is in the IEP team? Is the parent, that's you. Remember, I always say this, the psychologists, they really understand their tests and they know about, child development and support. Speech clinicians, the speech therapists, the occupational therapists, they really know their stuff about children and, how fine motor movements move and how the speech, expressive and receptive, they really know their stuff. But you are the expert on your child. So you are a major member of the IEP team. And I just like to reiterate that to parents. And they expect you to be an active member of it. And of course you should want to, right? This is your child. You want to make sure that, their interests are, whatever is decided in this team, that as a group, you guys are making the best decisions for this child, right? But besides the parent, we also have the school psychologist who must be present at an initial meeting to interpret the psychological evaluation. And any subsequent meetings where new evaluations are being discussed, the psychologist should be there from the school. Then we can also have a special education teacher because they can interpret the educational assessments. The general education teacher, if one is involved, right? So if your child is in an integrated co-teaching classroom, that's those classrooms where there are two teachers, a special education teacher and a general education teacher, well, then you would expect the general education teacher to be a part of it. The district representative, and that could be anyone like the psychologist or a teacher. And then there's the other providers, right? The speech, the occupational therapist, the counselor, etc. And any outside experts invited to the meeting. All of these people, they are part of the IEP team, and all of their input and decisions is what decides who is going to be, if your child is eligible for services. But before we get to how an IEP is developed, who's missing from the list? I didn't say anything about the student, right? Because if your child is 14 years of age or older, they have to be asked to attend the meeting. So you want to keep in mind. And I actually had a meeting with a child who was younger than 14 and he attended it. And there is something very nice about a child understanding what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and having their voice inputted on the IEP. So don't try to keep it from them. You want them to be a part of it, because if they're an active part of the IEP process, they can also be an active part in their education and what that program looks like for them. So remember, that's important. And let me just also mention that next week in the Beyond Access series, my colleague Panapota will be going through how to prepare for the IEP meeting. So while we're telling you that, you are an integral part of this team, don't worry, we'll help you be a prepared integral part of the team also. So now we're going to discuss how is it developed. Well, there's an identification. The first box at the top is, let me pull out the sample IEP before we get on to this, right? Well, actually, let me just finish this. There are earlier I mentioned the present levels of performance. There's some special factors, developing achievable appropriate goals. You want to identify some services and programs, consider additional supports, and determine the least restrictive environment. So now I'm going to show you a sample IEP. Hold on a second. I'm assuming, Ari, you guys can see it? Okay, I heard nothing, so that means yes. So this is a sample IEP that we're looking at right here. And first at the top right here, this is the identification box. So hold on, let me see if I can annotate it, if I can show you. So right here, this is your annotation box. I don't know if you see this whole box here. And this is where you have all of the information. You want to check this for accuracy. So here we're looking to see, is the student's name right and spelled correctly, their date of birth, their student ID number, their classification. There has to be one of 13. So is it, speech and language impairment? Is it learning impaired? Is it deaf hearing? Like whatever it might be, you want to make sure that it's in that identification box. The projected date the IEP will be implemented. So let me try to move this down here. Hold on, because I can't see. There we go. All right. So right about, this is the last page. Let me go to the, hold on. It's not, hold on a second. There it goes. So here we go. All right. So as you see, this is also the, let me just spotlight it for you. Right here, the projected date that the IEP is to be implemented, right? And so it'll be a date there. And then the projected date of the annual review, because like I said earlier, every year we go over a new one. There goes the student's name. That's where their date of birth should be. And their disability classification would be right there also. So the next box that we see here is the present level of performance. Like I said, we call that the plop. And this discusses, it's divided into areas of current successful performance and areas of concern. So this, normally you'll see the first part of it is normally filled with test scores to let you know what your child has, where are we at academically? What are they doing in their test? And normally that's at the very beginning of it. And they put all the tests and the scores, and then they get down and then they start talking about the child. So they let you know, how are they doing? What's their expected rate of progress? Parents should speak up and speak about the strengths and challenges, and they add layers to the story. So we definitely want to see right here where I'm pointing to, where I'm saying the needs of the student, including consideration of student needs that are area of concern to the parent. You want to let them know something there. And I know you might be thinking, well, there's nothing. And in the meeting, it can be a little bit not scary, but you're just overwhelmed because you really, typically an average meeting is about an hour to 40 minutes, right? So that's why we suggest, and when you watch Pana next week, she'll have some tips and things that you can do to be prepared for your meeting so that when these sections come up, your voice and input will be heard on the IEP, right? Sometimes it's written before the meeting and it's reviewed at the meeting. So I would say probably like, depending on the age range, if it's school age, like kindergarten and up, normally it's already written. And they will add more to the story as the child comments and other members from the team comment. But, make sure that you chime in on what's going on because, and you can also mention things that are going on at home, in the community, and also with your own version of school, right? And it's also the foundation for developing goals and recommending services, right? So once again, they'll talk about the academic achievement, the evaluation results, and then they're going to get to this part here where they have the social and the physical development. And the social is very important. I think that, one thing that I do appreciate, I feel like the more that I'm like in education or with it, they started paying a lot more attention to the whole child and the social emotional aspect of it, of a child and what's going on. The pandemic taught people social emotional learning is very important, and they really try to highlight this. So this box right here, you're going to get a lot of information about your kid, their strengths, their weaknesses, the things that, they might be anxious about. And once again, we want to know, what are the parents' needs? What is concerning you about this portion here for your child? Yes, your child might be very friendly and they might make friends easily, but does that mean that they're easily influenced, or are they a leader, right? Do you wish that, there were some other things that they did more? This is the time when your voice can be heard and you would put it right there. Same thing with physical development. We're going to talk about their strengths, their weaknesses. Does your child need a cane? Do they need glasses? Do they have asthma? This is where we add these things. We always put these things in here. And then right here, it is the management needs. What's the way that works to make sure that, if it's time to, if your child is a child who needs to move all the time, how do you manage that in school? If your child is a child who, can't be around noises that are too loud, how do we deal with this, right? These things are placed in the management needs portion. And then, once again, parental input is important, right? So while we do want to know about, the specific supports, the behavioral ones, about, when he's physical in class was done, or hallways throughout the school day, that's all important. But what do parents notice? What do you see? And these are you want to put that in the management needs portion. And then they have some special factors. So this just special factors is addressing hearing or vision loss, behavioral challenges, limited English proficiency, and assistive technology. So now, hold on, we're going to go to the next part, which is right here. These are our measurable post secondary goals. And this is for preparation for life goals after high school. So if your child is, 18 or below, don't even worry about this. But these are the things you want to think about after high school, right? And it says to start when the child is 15. we always recommend that you start it sooner. If your child is in District 75, they have a whole team that is just devoted to this, making sure that, transitions are done smoothly and that it's talked about and that your child is aware of it. So you want to keep that in mind too. And it should be student-centered planning, right? So now we're going to talk about some, wait, hold on, let me go back. Hold on. So, okay, so we're still back here on the measurable annual goals, right? So these annual goals, this is what I was talking about when I said SMART, right? So, it should really be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. That's the acronym SMART, right? So, it shouldn't just be, Tim is going to read better. No, how much better, for how, when, how are we determining how he's reading better? How much progress are we expecting to see? And when should you see this, right? So this is it. This is where you see it. And they get kind of long, and then they have, they break it down even more sometimes, short-term goals and long-term goals, but you want to your goals should be new every year also. If you have a child, the goals that your child had last year should not be the goals this year. And let's just say for some reason your child didn't hit the goal last year. Well, then we need to have a discussion about why the child didn't hit the goal, right? Do we need to adjust the goal? Was it too hard? Was it too low? Did they blow past it? Could they not reach it? Was it not reasonable? Right? And so that's why goals should change every year, because if it's reasonable, unless outside circumstances, some things you can't control, but for all intents and purposes, if things are, a normal school year, whatever that means, right? But if it is a normal school year, then your child should be able to attain these goals. And if they're not, then you need to really have a discussion as to what these goals need to look like next year if they didn't hit them, right? So, and if they don't, then we need a very good reason as to why you're carrying over that same goal. Once again, they should be SMART. So an example of a SMART goal might be, Janelle will learn multiplication table up to 12 by the end of the school year. The criteria, which is this part here, would be 85% accuracy, the method, how it's going to be measured, teacher-made materials, observations, and tests maybe, and then the schedule. So when will the progress be measured? Sometimes people do it sometimes a year, once per quarter. When I did it for my students, oftentimes I would put it, monthly or, something like that, because we always gave tests. So depending on how the child is academically, where they are, in terms of how the teacher assesses, that will make the determination about how the progress will be measured. So once again, you're the parent. It's okay for you to put in your input and to let them know if you think that goal is or isn't appropriate. So remember, you are an integral part of the team. So you can tell them, I don't think it's a good goal or I think it should focus more on this, but your voice is there. So you want to make sure that that you are heard, right? And if there's something that you feel, of course, share that with your team. So this part here is the reporting progress to parents. And it just talks about, different periods on the progress report when they're going to discuss where the child is in meeting their goals, right? So it should be as often as report cards, but every child is not the same. And when I say as often as report cards, I mean, normally you get like about 2 or 3 a year. So it should be that many at a minimum. It shouldn't be less than that. Because if you sometimes, depending on what the goal is, if you wait that long, how would you know if they met it? Or if it's broken down into smaller goals, which sometimes they do, then how are we checking to make sure that the child is on track to meet the goal? So depending on the goal, that should help drive how often the reporting progress will be to parents. Some students might be more frequent if they're on alternative assessment and they're not taking grade level standards or completing a state test. Those tend to be a little bit more often. So like I said, oftentimes I would measure mine with the parents. I would do it like 4 to 5 times a year, not just when report cards were out, but every child is different and every grade was different. Every class grade was different. D75, it was a little bit more. When I was in a community school, it was less. Everything is different. So let's see, the next page we're going to, okay. So right here, we have services and programs needed to meet the goal, right? So this is what's gonna tell us, yeah, we want them to meet it, but how are they gonna meet it, right? So are they sufficient? So the setting, you know, where is it happening? Is it happening in the classroom? Is it happening out of the classroom, right? This is also important, right? Is the support being pushed in while the child is actually having that class, or is it being pulled out? Is the child being pulled out and they're having it at a separate place? Are they doing it in a group? You know, how often and how long is the session? You know, when kids are really young, it's 30 minutes. When they get older, those class in high school, those could be 40 minutes, 45-minute sessions. So this is what's determined, you know, on how, and then it also lets you know when it starts. So yeah, so, but this has to be, if it's on the IEP, once again, I told you it's a legal document. So if it's on the IEP, that's how many times they have to do it. That's the law. It's a legal document, right? So now the next part is some additional supports. So let me see. No, hold on a second. So we have some additional supports, right? So additional supports might be, you know, what kind of accommodations is your child receiving, right? So they might receive, I don't know if you can see here. Let me try to show it to you again. Right here. They can get, let's do a small, right? No. So yeah, they might get a testing accommodation, right? So that means that they might get, you know, separate area, no more than 12 students, questions read and reread, right? Directions read and reread. So these are some of the types of accommodations. So accommodations are not the same as services. So remember, but they're very common on IEP. So an accommodation could be a scribe, someone to write out the portions of the test for your child, someone to write for them. Like I said, a separate location, breaks, these are different accommodations. A modification is the change in the standards, such as the promotional criteria. So let's say that if the child is taking a state test, you know, obviously, typically you would want the child to get, I believe, like a 65%, which would be a 2. And I think that they still do it like that. But if it's a modification, it might be this student in particular, we want them to hit 60% of it or 70% of it, right? So, because it's modified how we're going to grade them when they take the state tests. And then also assistive technology or devices. These are other additional supports that your child can receive. So right here, we have a coordinated set of transition activities, right? So once again, this is the second section related to transition. It should be discussed ideally starting in middle school, but definitely through high school years. When I was at D75, as soon as a child hit 12, we started making these things. We started talking about it. And you want to start thinking about what they're going to do as they become adults. What kind of things do they like to do? You want to think about this, right? Because you want to think about vocations. Like, you want general ed kids to think about their future. Why wouldn't we want a child with an IEP to do the same? It should be discussed. It should be centered with input from the entire circle, from the support. So the parent should do it, the teacher does it, the therapist will do it, the student should do it too, right? And it should list plans that who's going to be responsible for each activity. So yeah, so right here we have determine the least restrictive environment and placement. So the child should be to the greatest extent possible with non-disabled peers. So last week, I discussed with you guys about LRE, which is the least restrictive environment. And I showed the continuum of special education services and programs considered, but it always begins with general education, right? So then we have special transportation. So hold on one second, please. Thank you. So special transportation, right? So that needs to be written if your child is going to be taking a school bus, and do they need a minibus? Do they need limited time? You know, this is where you answer that question there. And then the placement recommendation, where will the child be placed, right? Your IEP will not have a specific school setting, such as, but they'll tell you a setting. So it won't say PS 329, but it will say District 70. It will say a specialized school, or it will say a community school. And that's how you know what they're talking about, where they, where the placement recommendation is, you know. And then also there is the classifications, right? So we're gonna go back to the upper right hand. I had mentioned to you guys here, right here, I think you can see it, the disability classification. There are 13 federally classified classifications mandated in the IDEA, and they can't be changed. Preschool children do not get that. If you're in CPSC, they don't get that. It'll just say preschool child with a disability. But 5 and up, it will say autism. It will say, you know, emotional disabled. It will say one of the 13, you know, other health impairment, one of those, right? And the team determines the classification in order to determine eligibility. If your child does not have a classification, they cannot receive services. So some parents feel like, well, I don't want my child labeled. And that's fine. But what I always remind them is they can tell you that the child, they can call it whatever they want. You want to focus on the services, because special education is services. So I don't ever recommend getting caught up in the classification. You really want to make sure that you're focused on the services that your child receives. If your child has multiple issues, then the team has to pick the driving issue. So one example, my son, he has autism and ADHD. ADHD is typically defined as OHI. That's the classification that it would fall under if all he had was ADHD. But because he has autism too, there was a choice. We went with autism because that's the one that directly impacts and drives the need for this individualized education plan program. So, and other challenges that can and should be addressed on the IEP. That's something to think about when choosing your classification. So yeah, and then you want to think about, let me explain to you the difference between a diagnosis and a classification. A child with a diagnosis of dyslexia and has a classification of learning disability, right? So because even though their diagnosis is dyslexia, and they, you know, you might tell your friends they're dyslexic, the DOE, they only have 13. So it's gotta fit under one of those 13. So dyslexia falls under learning disability, right? A child with ADHD, like I said earlier, they fall under other health impaired. Okay, so and keep in mind, ADHD has a lot of comorbidities, right? So a child will have ADHD and they'll have autism, or they'll have a speech delay, or they'll have other disabilities and challenges that tend to group with the ADHD. So with everything that we have talked about, let me just stop this and go back to the, hold on, please. All right. So yeah, so with everything that we've discussed today, let me go here. All right, we went over the 13 classifications. What does a good IEP look like? Right? So what does a good IEP look like? Well, each year the IEP should be different and the goals should be changing. You really want to check your IEP for accuracy throughout. Once again, the name, the date, the ID numbers. There should be new goals, right? Every year. It shouldn't be the same goals. And if the goals are the same, remember, there needs to be a justification as to why we're not changing that goal. Services and accommodations to make a difference. So the setting, the frequency, and the group size. Everything should be in writing on the IEP. Don't accept promises. Anything that somebody tells you, if it's not on the IEP, your child will not receive it. An IEP is a legal binding document. You can't cross out or white out on it. If there's something wrong with it, then they have to amend it because it's a legal document. And so if there's something that you felt your child was, there was a service they were supposed to receive and it's not on there, or they were supposed to receive it 3 times a week. And then the meeting you guys agreed on 3 times a week, but the IEP says 1 time a week. Your child's only going to get it one time a week. So you really want to make sure that what's there is what was discussed, right? And also keep in mind, you don't have to agree with the other members of the IEP team, but you can respectfully disagree, right? And you can say so immediately at the meeting, right? And if that is the case that you don't agree with what's been said or what's written in the IEP, you can follow up with a written letter asking for a second meeting. That's known as a reconvene. You can get help at Include NYC. You could call us at our helpline, 212-677-4660, or you can reach out to somebody at the school, because hopefully you do have a relationship with the people who are teaching your child. You can let them know what's in there that you don't agree with, right? But if you don't disagree and you're fine with what's on the IEP, the new IEP should go into effect within 10 days. And you can ask for a draft, but the school is not obligated to give it to you. However, you know, they do have to give you a copy of the program and services that have been recommended. And also for people that need another language, you have the right to have your IEP translated. So let's see. So, but now what happens if you agree with it, you thought it was fine, but the IEP isn't working. So what are we going to do now, right? Well, you can monitor the services indicated on the IEP that are being delivered. And providers do have to log every session on a computer system or in writing that they're having with your child. So that's how you can make sure that they're getting the services they're supposed to get. You can ask your child from time to time how they're doing with the therapist, right? Parents forget, you know, talk to your children. You can check to ensure that a specified number of sessions are being given. You can check attendance. Schools don't always remember to tell you if there's a lapse in services, right? If their therapy, if the speech teacher, you know, had an accident and she's out for 3 weeks, the school might not remember to mention that to you. You can check the correct number of sessions are given in the correctly sized groups. And if services are not available in the school, you can ask for an RSA, which we know as a related services authorization. And that's just a paper that they give you so that the services your child's supposed to be receiving in school, they can receive them outside. But if it's still not working, contact everyone involved in the provision of services and ask them what's going on. You could make a formal request to reopen the IEP and reevaluate your child if it's necessary. You do not have to wait a full year. You do need a full committee meeting, though, to come up with a new plan. And if the IEP team is not responding, you should contact the vice principal or the principal. Don't escalate outside the school without doing that first. You want to talk to them first. But then if they don't respond or you're not in agreement with their response, then you can escalate to the superintendent or you can consider mediation or an impartial hearing. So the first 3 items are not just things that we should do if the IEP isn't working, but it's something that's, you know, good practice to monitor how our child is doing, right? So once again, I hope that when you finish that you do have a better, you know, example of like what the IEP, what the individualized education program is. You can identify some key sections on the IEP. And I hope that you have 1 to 2 action steps to take to help increase your participation in this process. And thank you once again. I am Kim. This is our helpline information, 212-677-4660. And now I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Jose and Ori. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim, so much. We have some questions that are in the Q&A, but folks, if you have a question and you haven't dropped it into the Q&A yet, now is your chance to do it. One of the questions, a lot of these questions you've already answered, so it's going to be me asking you to kind of repeat or maybe expand on them. There's a couple of questions in here about how do parents know if IEP goals are met? And you talked a little bit about the importance of talking to your children, you know, discussing with your IEP team how those goals are going to be tracked. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. So one thing is, like I said, if you should have a copy of the IEP because they send one home with you. If you need another copy, you can request one from the school so that you can know what goals are expected to be hit. Now, you can speak to their teacher and ask them, is Simone on track to meeting her goals? Is he, making it 12 times table? Does he still need some help? Is he able to write sentences? Is there something else that I should be supporting him with? Right? You don't have to wait until the parent teacher conference. Now the DOE does hold them twice a year, but you don't have to wait for them. In fact, most teachers and the school would encourage you to reach out to your child's teacher to know what's going on, because if you realize and you speak to the teacher and you're like, I don't know, are they meeting it? And the teacher's like, actually, no, they're struggling. That's a good opportunity for you and the teacher to discuss what's some other interventions that we can get in place here. What are some other things that we can do? Is there something we can do at home, right? But you can't mitigate the situation if you don't know. So it's really important that parents have a good relationship with the teachers and the therapists, but especially if your child has an IEP.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially when your child has an IEP, the home to school connection is super important. And finding ways that work for you to keep in contact with your teacher. Some teachers use things like the Remind app to communicate with parents. Some teachers may write emails. It's really finding what works between you and your child's teacher to make sure that you're constantly knowing how your child is doing. And honestly, part of that is also at the IEP meeting, would love to empower all of you to, when discussing IEP goals, to ask the question, how will that be tracked? Even if you ask it after every IEP goal, okay, how are we going to track that? How are we going to monitor progress, right?
Right.
That's the key word, right? Progress monitoring.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. What do we suggest for parents when an IEP has been created, goals have been set, and we're back to the annual review, and goals weren't met for whatever reason? What do we suggest?
All right. So if goals aren't met, there's a number of things you can do, right? First, we want to know, I would certainly have a meeting with the teacher and the therapist because I want to know what they're seeing and what's going on. Second of all, you as a parent, you know what's going on with your child. Is there something going on at home that is impacting your child meeting their goals, right? Is there something you can get help with or you need assistance with, right? But maybe the goals aren't appropriate for your child. Maybe we thought that, Janelle would be able to meet this goal, and actually it's too intense for her. It's not broken down. Whatever the skill is, it wasn't broken down and scaffolded enough. So maybe we need to take it back a step. Maybe we need to try to help her hit something else. Maybe, children grow really fast. One thing that I remember in early intervention, when I used to do early intervention in CPSC, and I used to tell the parents all, miss a day, you miss a lot, right? Like kids grow and change so quickly, one day it's like it's a roller coaster. One day it's like, shoom, they're learning so much. And then another day, sometimes it just almost seems like it stalls and it just needs a minute. So do we need to adjust it? Do we need to change? Do we need to reevaluate? These are some other things you could do. Maybe we need another evaluation to see if, it was going this way, but that's something that we noticed. Last testing was 2-3 years ago. It might be time for some updated testing. We might need to reevaluate. So these are all things we can do to make sure, the point is you want to see growth. You want to see growth.
Yeah.
And if you're not seeing it, then we need to come up with some other things and make sure that we are expecting and challenging, because you want to challenge the child too, right? You want to have good expectations that they can meet. So I would do all those things. I would think about all those things.
I think one of the things that you said that's key is you want to see growth, right? So there's a couple of things that I would say on this point, right? You never want to get to the point where at an annual review, you've seen zero progress, right? So that just goes to reinforce what we were saying earlier about the importance of communicating with your child's teacher, and related service providers too. We should loop them in as well.
Yes.
And so if there's no progress happening and you're finding out that there's no progress at an annual review, that's a problem, right? Now, then there's other things. I want to cover everything when it comes to not meeting goals. your child might not have met the goal that was established, but had made significant progress toward it. And that sometimes happens. And it's also okay for in those situations to say, you know, if Jose had a little bit more time, he would meet this goal.
Mhm.
That's an example of a goal that you might want to say, all right, let's keep that goal in for another year,
Absolutely.
right?
Mhm.
So it's one of those things where if it's really super important, again, that home to school connection, because if we're not seeing meaningful progress, right, we want to be able to say to our child's teacher, our child's related service provider, hey, listen, this is Jose's goal. He's had this goal for 4 months. No progress is being made. We need to tweak now. We shouldn't wait for the annual review,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
There's a question in here about what happens to services when a child transitions from grade levels. And so what I mean from this is like, you know, the big transitions are from elementary to middle school to high school, right?
Mhm.
Should I be thinking about services and supports differently in those settings, or when my child moves in those settings? Should I be prepared for the way that they're offered to be different?
You can, but I will say this, you will definitely see a difference between middle school and high school, right? Because middle school and high school, now we're talking about vocational goals, right? We're putting in transition things, right? Because you're about to have an adult, you're about to have a young adult. So those should be different. But the other things, speech, OT, I've heard some occupational therapists say, like, you know, after 5th grade, why are we getting occupational therapy? Because the child needs it, right? At the end of the day, it's what your child needs. So if your child still needs, you know, OT or speech or whatever in high school, then they should still get it. Another difference you might see is the amount of time that they will receive it, right? Because in elementary school, I believe it's 30 minutes that they have it, but when they get to middle and specifically high school, those tend to be 40-minute sessions. And so that's another difference that you would see. But, you know, and other than vocational / transitional services, no, whatever service your child needs, that's the service they should receive.
I also think that whenever you're going into the IEP meeting, as a parent, you should never try to approach the services based on the setting that your child learns in. You should base the services based on your child's needs,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't matter if your child is attending ICT or is in a general education setting or in a special class. The services they need are the services they need no matter where they learn.
That's right.
And so the same thing, I would say the same thing based on what grade they're in. It doesn't matter that they are in 2nd grade and 6th grade, a senior.
Mhm.
Services they need are the services they need. And yes, the services should grow, evolve, change just as your child does. But those decisions aren't based on where your child learns, they're based on what your child needs.
Mhm.
Um, I am, so someone is saying, I didn't know that the school had to give me a copy of the IEP. When did that start? And the short answer is it's always been a thing.
Yep, always. You're always supposed to receive a copy of the IEP. And if you don't, you let them know I need the IEP and they will get it to you.
And your IEP should never be a surprise, right? Because
Right.
you're supposed to be an important member of that IEP team.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to help
Yes.
and like create it, right?
I always tell the teachers I used to train, no parent should be walking out of their IEP meeting confused or surprised. Like we should all kind of be like, know what's going on here. Like if so, we have a problem. Like something went wrong somewhere.
Kim, we could talk about this for hours. I know we could. I feel that, but we are getting close to time, so we have time for one more question. And one of this question is, what if I don't want to go to the IEP meeting alone? Can I bring someone with me? Who can I bring?
You can bring anyone you want to bring. You can bring a parent member. You can bring someone who knows the child. You just want to give 72 hours notice to the IEP team, right? So whoever is the other person on it, the psychologist or the district representative, you want to let them know, his aunt, Janella will be at the meeting to support. Okay, give them notice and you can bring them with you. And we actually recommend it. It's a good idea because there's so much that goes on. They can take notes while you can just be in the meeting. So I always support is important and it does help.
Thank you so much, Kim, for another night of amazing, important information. Appreciate you coming by and coming through. We're looking forward to meeting again with Include NYC next week for our final installment. But until then, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good night.
Good night.